So perfect. Now, last but not least, for this segment on API product and monetization, we will have a great influencer and thought leader in the space, Adam Duvander, principal consultant at EveryDeveloper, and he will talk with us about what your API marketing needs. Hello, Adam.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, Mehdi. Yeah, it has. It's been super and exciting to follow API Days today. It's great to be part of it as well, and to share the stage with Syncytia and Stoplight and Mosif, all really great companies and with really great messages. So I'm excited to close out this session here.
Last but
today.
not least.
That's right. Yeah. Well, super. And for my part today, I have 5 short stories, and from that, we'll be able to get 3 mistakes that I hope you all can avoid in your API marketing. So, in a lot of the work that I do with developer-focused companies, I find that a lot of people want to be Reddit famous. Maybe developers also want to be Reddit famous. And I'm here to tell you that I have been Reddit famous, and this is the first story here. It was a long time ago. It was maybe 2005 or 2006, and I wrote a post on REST for Wired and their WebMonkey resource. So it was focused on web developers and trying to say, what is this new thing, this REST thing that we've heard about? And what happened was someone added it to Reddit, and they added it to Dig as well, which kind of sets the dates it a little bit there, right? And I got this screenshot from my editor, who was super excited because lots and lots of visits were coming from this. And then I did the thing that you are never supposed to do on the internet. And that was that I read the comments. And I remember people going and saying negative things about this piece that I had done that was attempting to show what is this REST to someone who is a web developer but has never heard of kind of APIs and what you would do with REST. And one in particular, now deleted Reddit account, went through line by line explaining what I had got wrong from their perspective as a 2006 era REST expert. And what I took away from that first experience being Reddit famous is that developers are a really tough audience. And now, having spent the years since then working with that audience, it is still the case, but they can also be a really rewarding audience. And so the remaining stories will be others interacting with those developer audiences. Now, a lot of times we'll see Stripe mentioned as kind of the pinnacle, the one that you want to be like. This is Stripe's page circa 2011, and I think it says sort of how Stripe became successful, more so than docs or anything. It was understanding the developer mindset and the problem that they solved, that you used to have to get this merchant account to be able to get started. And they helped to show that that didn't have to be the case. They solved real developer problems, but they created one for those of us who have APIs and want to reach developers, which is not only a high bar to hit, but also this sort of expectation that because you have an API, developers are who you want to reach. And this was touched on a little bit in some of the earlier talks, but the second story is related to that and comes from my time at Zapier, where we connected thousands of apps together to be able to allow end users to automate things. But of course, those of us who are at API Days know that behind the scenes of those apps are actually APIs. And so I worked on the platform side, helping someone who had an API connect it to our users. So they have to know about APIs. They have to be really technical. And so one of the things that we did was create a CLI for our platform. And this was the first sort of landing page. After that, we had this sort of legacy builder, but that was still the main way. But we said, oh, you can try this new CLI. Understandably, people didn't really want to do that as much because it's not the main thing, right? So we gave it sort of equal billing at some points. We looked at our style guides and we said, oh, maybe it's the primary thing we want people to do. We should make this blue button. But still, at each of these stages, everyone still went to that old way of doing it, even though we had this great developer tool that people had told us they wanted. Eventually, we did something like this. It became the primary call to action. You would think at this point that would be the one that would get clicked, but still people went down. And this is not an exact screenshot, but my memory is that we said something like this, that this is super old, don't use it. And still people clicked that link, not the button to use the more developer-friendly version, but the other one that was more visual. And what we realized at the end of this is mistake number one that I've now seen many companies make in my work at EveryDeveloper, which is that mistake of looking at Stripe's an API, so therefore we should reach developers directly. And this assumption that just because there's an API, it means that your company is dev focused, that you want to reach those developers directly, that they are that primary audience. And the reality is that it's a spectrum that could go down to kind of developer enabled, where someone else discovers everything, swipes the credit card, like was mentioned earlier, and then sort of hands off to a developer. That's kind of the further end of the spectrum there. And there are spots in between that I've pinpointed here in this, and there's probably more ways to break it down. But the reality is that these two at the far end, closer to focused, is really where any marketing activities would be needed. And that if marketing activities that are directed at developers and that are really focused on developers, and that as you go the other way, you still need things that speak to developers, but there's less sort of marketing activity. So it could be that some of you who are watching this now recognize you're all the way on the left side of this, and that your roadmap that says be exactly like Stripe might have been changed now. You can do less. So that's the first mistake. And now going into the third story here of my time at Programmable Web, where we saw thousands of API announcements. And they would be boring, much like this one that I made up here. And it was my job to try to figure out what story was within this API announcement. And again, it comes from this standpoint of expecting that the API, having an API means that you definitely have this developer focused audience. But my job was to figure out what the point was of something, something like how to divide by zero in this case, as they're trying to explain by their API, but API announcement. But really that effort of what something does and who it is for is something that, regardless of who your audience is something that is really up for you to figure out what the point is. That shouldn't be on someone at Programmable Web or wherever. And hint, in the largest light bulb possible here, the product is not the point. And that brings us to mistake number 2, which is putting that emphasis on the product. And it would be really awkward now with this slide on this mistake and on promotion if I were to then promote my product. But I only do it to communicate. This is my book that goes through how to reach developer audiences, but I really do it to highlight this main point of the entire book. You can save yourself 140 pages of reading here with just reach developers with education and not promotion. And if you do that one approach, and it sort of addresses these couple of mistakes that we have mentioned so far. So one thing about education that sometimes is misinterpreted, and in fact, there are education groups within API companies that are fully focused on training, and that's a different kind of education. You might look, again, Stripe docs. They're looked at as the best that you can have, but in this case, this is not the type of education, or at least not the only type that you should be thinking about. So this is very product focused, and you want to be able to think of education outside of the product as well. And to give an example of that, I have another story. This story is about a young man who grew up in a desert town. He was an orphan, and he got into some trouble and ended up finding his father's good friends for some help, and needed to actually use that friend to be able to get out of town. And as they were leaving, they were stopped by troopers. And maybe you've heard this story before. And the father's friend says, "These are not the droids you're looking for," and is able to get through this checkpoint with that. Now, this is, of course, from Star Wars, but we can pull some information, some developer-focused information from Star Wars, I'm confident. And I call this the developer content mind trick. That you'll have a developer who comes to you and has a problem. And remember, we want to educate. So let's take them through a potential solution to that problem that does not involve your product. And in fact, shows them exactly how to do it without you, to give them a blueprint. This is how you build this on your own. Because the reality is, we know that developers are going to think about doing that. And so if our educational content can start from that point of view, that we're going to help them do that, then much like the Jedi mind trick, we will actually change their mind, and they will see that there are a lot of edge cases to what you have done for in your API. That there's maintenance, not just building it once, but there's a lot that takes to keep it running. And so that is the developer content mind trick. And this is one example of someone who has done it well. Gremlin, their Chaos Monkey guide is, as it says here, about 18,000 words. It's huge. And it goes deep into how to implement Chaos Monkey, how to have a chaos engineering approach. But even though it's got Gremlin there on the nav bar, it's not each of these sections is not, here's how to use Gremlin. It's not education around that. It's education around the entire concept of how you would do this. And if you want another book other than the one that I mentioned previously to to consider that does a good job of getting the same point across. And in fact, across non-developer worlds as well. It is Badass by Kathy Sierra. And the example that is used throughout that book is about cameras. If you're a camera manufacturer, do you want to educate them on how to use the camera? That's more the product focused. Or do you want to make them a better photographer? And Kathy Sierra says the latter. You want to educate on photography, not on the product itself. And so mistake number 3, definitely related to the focus on the product mistake, is to teach the camera and not teach the photography. So avoid that mistake. And it's really hard especially when you are as close as you are to your API product. It is really hard to be able to kind of flip that perspective. And it's so I have a little trick for one way that you might be able to test whether you are doing that. But think of it as, hey, there's me with my developer delight behind me. But that's how I look to you. In most Zoom calls and other video tools, I actually look like that because that's how I look to myself in the mirror. That's how I look to me. Other people see the other, right? So find that way to be able to flip that perspective. And this trick, which is a keystroke on your keyboard, can help you. And so let's say this was a blog post and you are My Digital. Apologies to My Digital if you are watching this. But this was a kind of a press release sort of announcement, and found it to be a good example. So if you Control F or Command F on your keyboard and then search for your product name or your company name, if you did that here, you would find that there are all sorts of mentions of that. This is the second page here. So 5 on the first page, 5 on the second page, and then closing out here 3 on the last page. So that is 13 mentions of the company all throughout. There's a pretty good chance that this, without any other information, is very product focused. So let's see an example of something that doesn't do that. So this was an ad on Facebook or LinkedIn or somewhere that I saw. So LaunchDarkly paid money for me probably to see this ad, definitely for me to click this ad. So apologies to LaunchDarkly because I did click this ad and didn't sign up, but I got so much more from it because I ended up on this landing page that they paid to get me to. And I did the Control F trick, and you can actually see, it takes right there at the end. So there are 3 mentions there at the very end, but that's after it's been entirely focused on helping me understand feature management and showing everything that I will get from this. And yes, they want my email address. They also did pay to get me there. But still, they took a very problem-focused approach or education-focused approach, and not the product-focused approach. And so, as I close, I'm going to have one last story here, and this is a time. It's maybe a little bit of patting myself on the back of when I was able to keep things problem focused and not product focused. This was for Zapier. It was definitely meant to promote our platform and get people using authentication, hopefully modern authentication practices. And I used the Control F trick on my blog posts, and let's see how I did here. Okay, there one mention of Zapier or the platform there, and nothing. I'm going through showing some best practices. Use OAuth. This is great. Okay, one other little Zapier mention there. And then finally here at the end, okay, I give a little bit of a call to action that says, hey, we have this platform. You can connect your API to it, right? But 3 mentions in I think it's less than 2,000 words, but still, it's a long blog post. And do developers appreciate that is the question. They do. So this guy, he called it a brilliant post. I don't know. I kind of think that he was saying I was brilliant. But I've actually not told you the full story here. I haven't shown you the full tweet. So this so much. This is a brilliant post. That's real, but I forgot this part. Other than the marketing spiel, which is to say the 3 mentions of our platform across 1,500 words or whatever. And this wasn't that long ago, right? Just a few years ago. And yet I was still relearning a lesson, the lesson that I started with, that developers are a tough audience. And I don't know if I would change anything about that post that I wrote. But I do think of that developer almost every day. As we work with clients and who are maybe saying, could we promote just a little bit here, right? And there's a line that developers will hold you to. They are a tough audience, and in the end, they help us create much better content that is marketing, but is educational and can help them better use your product by being better informed about the entire problem space. And so they are a tough audience. If you ever want help navigating that path with them, you can find us at EveryDeveloper. In the meantime, make sure you avoid these mistakes of assuming that you're dev focused, because maybe you can get away with less of that dev marketing. Don't promote your product, but do look for ways to educate. And specifically in that education, don't teach cameras, as Kathy Sierra would say, teach photography. And that is the 5 stories and 3 mistakes that hopefully can improve your API marketing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. You started 2 minutes late because of the delay, so we'll keep the 2 minutes for the question. Man, developers are tough. 3 mentions, of Zapier.
Yeah.
Like for SEO, it needs to work with keywords, right?
Right.
Wow.
Like I said, I don't think I would change anything. I mean, who knows? Today I might have made it more, had more mention of the platform in it. Although I think that story goes back also to recognizing that developers weren't the primary audience for that platform, and that's maybe part of where that disconnect is. So because there wasn't as much of a connection to that developer who's looking at authentication, there wasn't a sort of change. It didn't make sense for them to make that leap to the platform, that made it feel all the more didn't connect as much, right? Whereas if I was talking about a problem that really connected with that developer, then it would be a much more authentic call to action. So that might be the piece about that's actually the bigger deal, is that realization.
Yeah, and Zapier is not a highly funded company. They just made a really small, I think, seed round, and they're not overly funded, mostly funded by customers, which is the best way to be funded.
Yeah.
And so the pressure is not there. But just imagine company who raise like 30, 40, 100 million,
right,
pushing for developers and everything. They want this marketing approach, and they will do everything wrong.
Yeah. And so and so that's why that first mistake is probably the most important, is understand that just because you have that API does not mean that developers are the immediate audience that you need to reach.
Yeah. So, but maybe if you really teach not how to use cameras, but if you teach photography, but you don't have the best camera out there, are you just like evangelizing the market for everyone?
Right. Yeah. Is there a better camera that they end up going for? I mean, I think you find what your camera is good at, right? So, uh, I mean, Instagram didn't have the best, most beautiful pictures, and and this is not even taking that much of a metaphor there, right? Like that's actual photos, and you had these filters, and it wasn't because people were posting the perfect photo. It was a photo that was good for the moment, right? So what's the sort of equivalence that you can find in your own API that maybe you aren't the Stripe even of your industry, but what is the area where you can really focus your education on that? What's the thing you do best that you can kind of plant a flag with?
Yeah, and some many great companies like DigitalOcean are this go-to community before going to market.
Mm.
Like they know they're a source of truth and a source of knowledge for developers, and whatever at some point they will achieve maximum, let's say, matchmaking with what developers want and what their product are doing. Let's say it like that.
Yeah.
It cannot transform donkeys into horses, as we can say in Europe, but at least it will give you the maximum the matchmaking that you can have, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. Thank you for being there again.
Oh yeah. Thank you
And
for having me. Yeah.
no, yeah, definitely on this. Developer marketing does not exist. API marketing, like uh, how tos and mistakes, right? Yeah, we would love to have you at the Apidays Interface events.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you very much, Adam, and